This is Transcast from the MetTrans Transportation Center. I'm Matt Kaplan. Change is hard, and it's especially hard when it crosses the streets and backyards of urban communities. This is just one reason why the Alameda Corridor was such a significant accomplishment. The $2.4 billion project consolidated harbor-related railroad traffic onto a single 20-mile corridor between the ports of LA and Long Beach and the railroad main lines near downtown Los Angeles. Gill Hicks deserves a good-sized piece of the credit for this public-private partnership success. From 1990 to 2000, he served as the general manager for the Alameda Corridor project. This was during the critical period of planning and consensus building that was so essential to building that freight pipeline across the Los Angeles basin. Now he's the director of Southern California operations for Cambridge Systematics, where he has managed several complex studies of goods movement for the ports, the Southern California Association of Governments, the LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and the Gateway Cities Council of Governments. These efforts have included planning for new transportation infrastructure, truck and rail forecasting, grade crossing impact evaluation, and benefit cost assessments. It was for all of these experiences that we asked Gill to join us on stage at the second annual Point Counterpoint event in March of 2012. It's also why we knew a Transcast conversation with him would be so interesting. I met with Gill a few weeks ago at his office in downtown Los Angeles. Gill, thanks very much for joining us today on Transcast.
My pleasure.
And also for hosting us here in your downtown LA office, the offices of Cambridge Systematics, which I hope we can talk about a little bit later, find out a little bit more about this company, because I was fascinated visiting the website last night. Let's start with the premise that you were part of the panel that participated in the recent Point Counterpoint event at Cal State Long Beach, which this year took a fairly deep look, considering the format available, at possible futures for goods movement in Southern California. And there were two scenarios painted, the very positive one and the not-so-positive one. You talked a lot about maintaining a sense of optimism in spite of all the challenges we face. Is that something that sort of has guided your career in goods movement?
Well, it certainly has, because I've taken on some fairly complex, challenging projects,
I'll say,
such as the Alameda Corridor, and if I did not have an optimistic viewpoint, I think I would have left a long time ago from that project and given up, because there were many challenges along the way, including negotiating with three competing railroads who didn't really like each other much, and competing cities which were jealously guarding their environmental quality and economic growth potential. So there were a lot of challenges just to make sure that we got the consensus we needed, but we had to keep an optimistic viewpoint all along to move it forward.
Did you find that was infectious, or was it a kind of a constant battle getting other people to look on the bright side?
I think it was not so much infectious, but because the project had so many compelling merits to it, that I tried to sell those merits and give them the information to know what would happen if you did not do it. The negativity essentially was telling them, if you don't build something similar to this, this is what your future is going to be. There's going to be a lot of grade crossing delays, a lot of pollution. But if you do this, there will be significant benefits, not only to the communities, but to the railroads. That idea became a little bit infectious in the sense that it motivated elected officials, it motivated the railroads, motivated the ports to jump on board and get this project going.
But as you said, it wasn't easy. How long did it take to get the Alameda Corridor in place and trains moving?
It took a total of 17 years. It was started out as a plan that I did when I was an employee of SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments. That plan was developed in '84, and the Joint Powers Authority for the Alameda Corridor didn't start until 1989. So 5 years were just to keep the idea alive. There was no real engineering done in that time frame. We just tried to motivate people to move along and get some engineering money. Finally, the two ports did agree to provide seed money for environmental studies and engineering. And so the Joint Powers Authority was created in '89. I became general manager in 1990 of the project, and the project didn't open for business until 2002.
Which was not long after you left. Went off.
That's
to
right.
be a
I
consultant.
went off to be a consultant at the beginning of 2001. The project was already well under construction, and essentially it was a construction project at that stage. And we were well along in that regard. But my interests really are in the formative stages of projects, the developmental stages, getting the approvals, getting the funding, doing the environmental work, getting the consensus to build it to begin with. That's really where my skills are better. I mean, I'm not a construction manager, so I was pleased to see it graduate to the construction stage, and that was my goal all along.
I'm going to come right back to this because I want to talk about the lessons that you learned and hopefully can be shared with others. Mm-hmm. But to lead into that, could a project like the Alameda Corridor be taken on today in Southern California and meet with the kind of success that you did? Would it be even more difficult now?
It would be more difficult. There's no doubt about it, because the heightened sensitivities about pollution and impacts. In this Alameda Corridor project, we consolidated railroad traffic from 4 different railroad branch lines onto one corridor, concentrating that activity in one corridor. But we fully mitigated the impacts in terms of grade crossing delays, and we lowered the railroad into a trench so that they did not see those impacts. But we did increase train levels through 6 small towns, but we eliminated the blockages that the trains they had before that were occurring there. So there were benefits to them, but there are trade-offs. But I think nowadays, with all the litigation that goes on with projects and with the uncertainties of how you do EIRs, there are various cases recently dealing with CEQA that have made it more difficult to get projects done.
Let me give you one example, which I bet is one of the ones that you have in mind, and that's the so-called SCIG, the Southern California International Gateway, which is meeting with a fair amount of resistance, even though a lot of the proponents can make the same kind of case that you were able to make for the corridor.
That's right. The SCIG is projected to have a capacity of 1.5 million lifts, or about 2.8 million 20-foot equivalent units of cargo. So it's a large yard, but even with the SCIG and even with the improvements to the UP's intermodal container transfer facility, which is just immediately north of the SCIG site, there could be a projected shortfall of lift capacity in the region by 2035 because the demand is projected to be fairly significant. Right now, the 2 ports handle about 14 million TEUs a year. By 2035, the projection is 39.5 million TEUs. So it's about a tripling of cargo volume, essentially, and a lot of that is going to be railroad-oriented. About 40% of the TEUs are so-called direct intermodal, which are the direct containers without any transloading involved. So that's a lot of demand. So these facilities are going to get filled up pretty quickly. But you're right, the challenge is getting the community nearby there to accept it. But it will have a significant benefit to the region by reducing truck traffic to the downtown rail yard that BNSF Railway runs, the Hobart Yard. So right now they have to truck these containers 20 miles north to Hobart Yard, where the SCIG is just a few miles north of the harbor. So dramatic reductions in truck traffic.
And the SCIG is just one example, a really good one, a big one, of the kinds of things that certainly would bring great changes to the infrastructure here in Southern California. You're in a position to provide advice to the people trying to make these projects take place. I said I'd come back to this. What do you tell the folks who are kind of in the position that you were in back there in 1990 and before, trying to get the Alameda Corridor underway?
first to be as objective and as fair as possible and truthful in the reporting of the impacts. I mean, if you don't report it, somebody else will, essentially. And so the number one thing in doing an EIR or an EIS, which is the federal document, you've got to show everything you know and be totally objective about it. So that's the way we handled the Alameda Corridor. Some of the impacts were significant, had to be mitigated. Same with the SCIG. The proponents of the SCIG will need to convince that there's something in it for everybody.
Even the neighbors.
Even the neighbors can find some reductions in emissions or soundproofing of their homes or whatever the mitigation takes. Not all of that is played out yet, of course, and the EIR is still being prepared. In fact, they're recirculating the document, so they will be providing new data for it. So the idea is try to get a consensus if possible. It may not be possible in every one of these major projects, but compromise is always the most difficult part of any project. With the Alameda Corridor, we negotiated individual agreements with every city along the way. And so there were mitigations provided to each city. We improved neighboring streets in Vernon and in other localities to make it easier for them to accept the impacts of the project.
In the point-counterpoint event, one of the things that you noted was the importance of listening. Interpreted how? I mean, listening to all of these different parties involved, I assume.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's understanding what they're really saying, understanding whether it's a real impact or a perceived impact in their mind, but understanding that it's their lives too. It's not just maintaining port volumes, which is, I think, an important goal for the economy, but understanding what their real concerns are is extremely important. That builds some trust, too, between the two parties, and hopefully that goes a long way to getting the project approved.
The challenges that are faced by projects like this, how much of that do you think is based on the still fairly high level of ignorance of the importance of goods movement to this region?
I think it's a very big part because people don't understand that cargo is not just ports too. It's domestic commerce. It's everything you have in your house, everything you have on your body. It comes in a truck or earlier maybe by a train or a ship.
I was just thinking these microphones that we're talking into right now, which came from Germany, and a recorder that came from Japan.
Exactly. I mean, people take for granted all the stuff that's sitting on the shelf in Walmart or Bed Bath & Beyond. They just think it comes out of the air somehow and miraculously shows up on the shelves. But it has to move there one way or the other. And that means trucks, it means trains, it means airplanes, it means ships. All those things have impacts on the air and on congestion. I believe that when officials understand how important cargo is for the economic lifeblood of this region, they'll feel a little better about it. I mean, for example, warehousing. Cities don't really like warehouses that much because they take up a lot of room and there are a lot of trucks coming in and out of those facilities. But you've got to store this cargo for a period of time in most cases, and that takes up space, but it also provides jobs for the community. So I really believe that ignorance is a major factor in it. I mean, I've been out in the Inland Empire and other communities in the region, and a lot of even very smart officials think that every truck on the road is coming from the port or one of the ports, and that's simply not true. There are a lot of them, but there are a lot more non-port trucks. You look at a Vons truck or a Walmart truck or a UPS truck. Those are not port-related trucks. There's a lot of domestic commerce that feeds our region.
Our guest on ContainerCast is Gill Hicks of Cambridge Systematics Incorporated. You're talking about the knowledge that public officials have, and it sounds like that can be lacking even at the local level. But when you look to the state, and in fact to the feds, is there a good piece of this that has to do with convincing people who probably don't live anywhere near Southern California, that improvements to infrastructure here are good for them?
Well, it's a good example because when we were selling the notion of the Alameda Corridor to the federal government, the state government, and to other states, we had to demonstrate that it was good for them in some way. And in fact, we did some research to show how many imports and exports were processed through these two ports in every congressional district in the United States. So when a member of Congress from Indiana, and actually this happened, said, why should I vote for this project when a constituent calls me on Sunday morning and asks me about it, what do I say? Well, I could tell them that there were X thousand tons of stuff coming through your district, but by these industries in your district, coming through the LA Long Beach, and we need to expedite that cargo, provide the capacity for it, and facilitate that commerce. So we are all connected through commerce in this country.
Nice work. Good to going in prepared with that kind of facts and figures.
Right.
We're anxiously awaiting, as we record this, finding out, hoping to find out that Congress is going to approve a transportation bill. Good sign of the kinds of challenges that are faced in trying to create a national transportation policy, I would guess.
Well, we're all waiting breathlessly for a new bill. I mean, it's the money is critically needed, but it's a little discouraging when you see so much dysfunction going on in Congress over these extensions, one after another, and no real progress. I think the Senate version of the bill is fairly promising in terms of recognizing the importance of goods movement, and hopefully there will be a grant funding opportunity for goods movement related projects. A lot of the time in competing for funds, you've got to compete with transit projects and things that have totally nothing to do with freight. So the continual challenge is that freight doesn't vote. At least they keep saying that, but I haven't given up. I think that we really need to show the benefits of freight, benefits of the ports, benefits of logistics. More and more, I think that our two ports here are learning that it's not just where they're located here that gives them success. It's logistics supply chain that gives them success, and they need to pay attention to how shippers think, where they want to move their cargo, because they can move their cargo through Prince Rupert, through the Panama Canal. They can go up to Oakland, and Oakland's doing some very smart things now, building more logistics facilities right near the port, and we need to think about that too.
This is exactly where I was hoping to go next. Since a big topic in this year's Point Counterpoint, but also last year, is Panama Canal, almost here. What's it going to do to us? And the consensus in large part has been, it'll have an effect, but really there are other factors that are going to prove more important. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do. I mean, the jury is still out on how much diversion there would be. In the official forecast that the ports have for 2035, there is already an assumed level of diversion, about 6% overall. When you're talking about 39 million TEUs, 6% is not that big of a dent in your cargo, but still, other analysts think it could be as much as 25%, which is is probably the worst case scenario. But I don't think it's going to get that bad. But we don't really know. The real issue is a matter of costs and service between the Panama Canal, going through the Gulf Coast and East Coast gateways versus moving the cargo through here in LA Long Beach and then on rail. So the two railroads that serve our ports, the BNSF Railway and the Union Pacific Railroad, are critical decision makers in this whole competition. Their rates, their service levels will be key to competing with the Panama Canal. And I think they're clearly up to the task. But as I may have said in the Point Counterpoint, complacency is our biggest enemy on this. If we think the Panama Canal is not a problem, that's a problem in its own right. So we have to remain competitive by remaining vigilant, making sure that our facilities are up to date and have the capacity to handle it, that we don't go back into a congestion mode, and that we solve our environmental problems, and that we get the cargo rolling as efficiently as possible. As soon as we start worrying about it, we're going to find ourselves backtracking.
How big of an issue is adoption of the kinds of technologies that are starting to pop up in competing ports, very successful and efficient ports around the world?
Well, I do believe that's going to be critical, although it's controversial. As you know, on the East Coast, the International Longshore Association, which is the ILWU's equivalent on the East Coast, is having very intense negotiations right now with the cargo owners, ship owners, over technology, and they have made it a potential strike issue. But I really do believe that they hopefully can maintain jobs on the shore, but also to remain competitive with these other ports, including Canadian and Mexican ports. We have to introduce new technology. In fact, it is happening already. The Middle Harbor Terminal in Long Beach will have some of the most modern facilities available, including dual hoist cranes, which can pick up 2 containers at once rather than just one. There will be other potential innovations in the terminal itself, perhaps involving automated guideway vehicles. But all these things need to be investigated so that more cargo can run, because these terminals are going to get very, very big, and we just can't run that level of activity with the status quo.
Let's say everything goes really well, and this is kind of the scenario that they tried to depict with one of those videos, which is available on the CITT website for anybody who wants to see these two potential outlooks for Southern California goods movement. If you were to look 10, 15, 20 years down the line, what would you like to see in place in a port that might turn out to be every bit as busy as you've just mentioned is being projected?
What would I like to see in place in the various terminals? Well, again, it's happening in some of these major ones like Middle Harbor. TRAPAC is going to be a new terminal, or it is an existing terminal in the Port of Los Angeles. It will be updated significantly. There will be more so-called alternative maritime power or cold ironing, which means the ships will be tied up to get their shore power. That's happening from an environmental standpoint. Each terminal will have to be more efficient in terms of the number of containers it can handle per hour. In order to handle 39 million TEUs, tripling of what we've got now, we're going to have to find new ways to do it.
Would you like to see, as part of this, more on the administrative or regulatory side, a true regional goods movement authority?
Well, I think it would be advantageous. I think it would be challenging politically to accomplish. And I think I may have mentioned at the counterpoint that we have agencies that already have a certain amount of authority for transportation planning, programming of transportation funds, and building projects. None of those agencies are going to want to give up any of their authority. That's the number one constraint in doing something new like that.
Human nature.
Human nature. It's it's just the way it is, I'm afraid. But with goods movement getting more and more well known, hopefully, and the importance of it getting more well known, an administrative authority like that, I think, could help. Because again, the focus of most of these agencies is on passenger transportation. The subways and light rail lines and things of that nature are paramount in most elected officials' eyes. When they think of a truck lane, wow, that's not exactly a sexy item compared to a fancy subway system. So it's hard to get their attention sometimes, but the way we're trying to overcome that is, again, explaining to them, if you don't do it, if you don't build exclusive truck lanes on the 710, and if you don't build them going east out toward the 15 freeway, you're going to have so many more trucks mixed with automobile traffic that it's going to be dangerous for one thing, congested for another, and it's going to be more polluting.
Yeah.
So we try to give them pictures of what it would look like without it and with it, and hopefully that'll generate some more interest.
I got to ask you, with apologies to our audience for the self-serving nature of this next question, since we're a university. But something else that I've heard you talk about is the importance of training, of preparing the professionals for careers in logistics, for the goods movement industry.
Well, absolutely. I think it is an up-and-coming field. The training is important. I mean, unfortunately, in this recession, the hiring has been slow in all industries, but I believe it will start to pick up. But there needs to be people who know the field. Again, I think it's important to know how shippers think. And this is not just important for shippers to understand logistics. It's important for everybody else involved in the supply chain, the ports, the truckers, the warehouse officials. All those folks need to know how it all relates to each other. And training is going to be critical because we need people who know what they're doing.
Before we wrap up here, I've got to give you a chance to say a little bit about this company that you've gone to work for, Cambridge Systematics, because the website, which is quite fascinating, shows an incredible breadth of responsibilities or services that you provide here. It seems like it'd be an exciting place to be.
Well, it definitely is, and interestingly enough, the company was founded by 4 of my former professors at MIT.
No kidding.
And that's where the name Cambridge comes from, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And they were training me in this transportation field. And at the time, back in the 70s, it was a very small firm. But it's grown now to about 220 people nationwide, and we have 11 offices in the U.S. and 1 in the Netherlands. But we do transportation planning only. We're not into engineering or construction. It's transportation solely, but we do all modes of transportation, freight, transit. We also do economic studies. We help agencies apply for grant funding, like the recent round of Tiger grants. We've been very active in that and quite successful in getting clients grant funding. But we do analytical work, modeling, travel demand modeling, simulation modeling, economic impact studies, traffic studies, etc.
It would seem to be a pretty good match for someone with your skills and education. You were telling me before we started recording about that bachelor's degree that you got in physics with a little emphasis in astronomy. How is it that somebody majoring in that area ended up over here?
Well, quite honestly, one day I fell out of orbit and needed a job. So
that's how it is sometimes.
And so when I got out of college with a degree in astronomy, I went immediately, frankly, to the U.S. Department of Transportation for an entry-level job and was retrained, and eventually went to MIT as a graduate student and got a master's degree in transportation there. But I think the technical skills I learned in college, the math and the science and the importance for being careful about sources of error, all those scientific training was very beneficial to me.
Gill, it has been delightful talking to you. I've taken a good deal of your time here, nearly a half hour, but I hope our audience enjoys this as much as I have.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
And thank you. Our guest on ContainerCast has been Gill Hicks, who is with Cambridge Systematics. He's the director of Southern California operations for that company that he was just describing to us. As you heard, from 1990 to the year 2000, he was the general manager for the Alameda Corridor project in Los Angeles County that is now moving lots and lots and lots of freight through Southern California, usually in ways that are barely noticed, which I suppose is both good and bad. We hope you'll join us for the next edition of Transcast. You can also check out our library of past programs at metrans.org. That's metrans.org. Transcast is a production of the Metrans Transportation Center, which is funded by the United States Department of Transportation and the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. Thanks for listening.